Friends, you may be seated. About to begin the service for Byron H. Weis. Another gentle reminder, if anybody has a phone, please turn it on silent. Officiating today's service is Cantor Stephen Soren, with some help from Rabbi London and Rabbi Melman as well. Melman.
As we gather today to mourn the loss of Byron Weis, a loving brother, husband, father, papa, great-grandfather, 87 years of a full life, we also come to celebrate his life, a life of such goodness and caring and love. Death has taken our beloved Byron. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence, there is lamentation. In their tears, there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, be with them. For Byron's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For his companionship that we shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory, for the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness, and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, and light as in darkness, and joy as in sorrow, and life as in death. אדוני מי יגור באוהליך משכון בהר קודשך, הולך תמים ופועל צדק ודובר אמת בלבבו. O eternal God, who may abide in your house, who may dwell in your holy mountain, those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless but honor those who revere God, who give their word and come what may, do not retract, who do not exploit others, who do not take bribes, those who live in this way shall never be shaken. This is the way that Byron Weis lived his life. A person who was honorable, who told the truth, who was the nicest person you could meet, who had an incredibly warm heart. As being one step removed from the family, but Byron was Machatanim, my sister-in-law's father. I got to see him interact so beautifully with the family, so proud of his children, Michael, of Hillary, of Jay, and of Andy, of all of the grandchildren, and his latest great-granddaughter, Perry. And a partner to Brenda for 62 years. You had quite a partnership, Brenda, a loving relationship, and as you look around this front row, you see the legacy that Byron has left with this amazing, wonderful, loving, caring family. My heart goes out to you, Brenda, and to all of Byron's children, and to know that his legacy is secure when I see the way that you are in the world, with love, with great intelligence, incredible integrity. Byron was a mensch. May his memory continue to bless you as you tell the stories of his life, share those amazing pictures that you have, and live according to a legacy of integrity, kindness, and love.
I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamed from Highland Park, New Jersey. I'm representing many, many people who are in New Jersey, who want to be here and share condolences and bring comfort to our beloved Chazan, Mike Weis, and his family. There are so many people who are in that circle for us because Chazan Weis and his family, Lisa, Jana, Shai, Michelle, we all embrace you. We embrace the entire family, the extended family, and we are a circle, a community that embrace everyone here with comfort. It's a circle of community and friends that is extending its warmth and its love and its comfort to your entire family. The Hebrew word for circle is ma'agal, and it features in the 23rd Psalm. Mizmor David, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binot deshe yarbitzeini al mei menuchot yinhaleni, nafshi yeshovev yancheni v'mag leitzedek leman shemo. Gam ki elech begeitz al mavet lo irara, ki ata imadi, shiftecha umishantecha hema inachamuni, taroch lefanai shulchan neget sorerai, shanta v'shemen roshi kosir vaya, achto v'chesed yerdefuni kol yemei chayai, shavti beveit Adonai la'orech yamim. On the sheet with you can read along, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Magleit Tzedek, paths of righteousness, or the circle of righteousness. These are the paths that Byron Weiss walked in as a mensch, as a good man, a decent soul. May his memory always be a blessing. May you always have comfort from a wonderful, wonderful family. And may God always comfort you. Amen.
Beyado avkidruchi, beit ishan ve'ayira, ve'imruchi geviati, Adonai li velo ira, ve'imruchi geviati, Adonai li velo ira. My soul I give to you, my spirit now in your care. Draw me near, and I shall not fear. Oh, hold me in your hands. Draw me near, and I shall not fear. I'm now safely in God's hands. On the first night of Hanukkah, the shamash candle gently kisses the wick of a lone candle. On this night alone, we chant 3 blessings, each beginning with the word Baruch. Baruch. Baruch, blessed be. And the holiday then begins as we recall the history and the majestic stories of our people. Last evening, and for future Hanukkah Eves in the years to come for you, this family, the word Baruch will echo with a different tone. It will elicit memories of Baruch, Byron, his Hebrew name, the majestic stories of his life and his impeccable character and career will be remembered. That, his family boasted to me, was the characteristic most reflecting his neshama, his soul. Such a dear son to Sydney and Eileen, husband, of course, to Brenda, father to his children, Jay and Ava, Michael and Lisa, Andy and Amy, Hillary and Charles, grandfather to Richard, Robert and Bonnie, Robin and Donovan, Randy, Grant, Michelle, Eli, Natalie, Jana, Ari, Elliot, and Shai, and of course, great-grandfather to Perry and brother to Marcia. Byron Weis, it appeared to me, was a man who lived his long years without blemish to his name. Not a tzaddik, not a righteous man per se, but a man who stood tall, who stood proud, and who planted goodness along his path in life. Lechu v'anim shimuli yirat Adonai elam adichem. The book of Psalms says, come forward, children, and listen. Listen to what it means to be a God-fearing person, and not only God above, but the godly in one another. Mi ha'ish hachafetz chayim. Be a man, be a person who yearns for life. Byron wanted to live. He desperately wanted to live. And I think it's because of you. He had every reason in the world to live. Mi ha'ish echafetz chayim ohev yamim liroto nitzor leshoncha mera u'sfatecha medaber mirma sur mera v'yaseh tov Ba'kei shalom v'radfehu. Guard your tongue from evil, your lips from deceitful speech. Reject evil, seek out good. Seek peace and pursue it throughout your life. Byron's touch upon the psyche and behavior of his children might, in today's parlance, label him an influencer. This small, brief, amended parable is an example of such guidance he may have shared with you, his children. It reads, one evening a Cherokee brave told his grandson that there were two wolves battling inside of each person. He explained one wolf is evil, one wolf is good. Well, which one wins? Asked the young boy. The old Cherokee replied, whichever one you feed. Byron's legacy was a dugma, an exemplar, not a do as I say, but do as I do, father his dear wife Brenda offered as praiseworthy to her husband. He taught and raised his children to be ethical, moral, honorable people. And knowing his success in this manner, I can only imagine he passed away a content man. Eza hu ashir, asks our wisdom literature, who is wealthy? The response is a man or a person who can be content with their portion given to them in life. Byron amassed significant success in his life, but with this accomplishment of raising good children, he had scaled his most sought-after summit. We will hear today from those who knew him most intimately, words gathered by all of his children, but to be spoken today by Hillary and Michael. His 11, now I imagine 13, with some marriages, grandchildren represented today by Richard, relatives represented by his cousin Mark Levine, and friends represented by Harold Stein. The family wished me also to acknowledge the devotion and the care which was showered upon Byron in his last year by caregivers Dave, Clint, Ben, and John. In a moment or two, you will hear from family, and you will hear about Byron's inclination to buy and gift people alligators, live and dead. The family, some may know, owned an alligator over the years, Rocco the Croco, I just imagine alligator was too hard to rhyme. I became somewhat infatuated with this part of his life, and so I did some digging. Alligators have lived on Earth for over 150 million years. When the dinosaurs began to die off 65 million years ago, it was the ancestors of today's alligators that managed to survive. Alligators are now, since 1967, an endangered species. Men like Byron Weiss are an endangered species. As the old adage notes, they don't make them like that anymore. Thus, it appears that evolution found that the alligator had to be created in an ideal mold, and then broke that mold and said, just going to let them be. They have no need to evolve. They were made perfectly in their shape. I thus reiterate that men like Byron Weiss have broken a certain mold. However, we will hear now from two of his children that dispel that fact. For they, along with their siblings as a collective gene pool, are their father. First, we will hear from Michael, and then Hillary, and then from our other family and close friends, Richard, we changed that, right? Richard, Mark, and Harold. Michael.
For someone who described himself as an atheist, my father had access to quite a bench of clergy. Our father was born and spent the majority of his life in the Chicago area, growing up in Downers Grove and living most of his adult life in the northern suburbs, Lincolnshire, Winnetka, and most recently Skokie. From his earliest days, he was always a standout in everything he did. As a child, he played 7 musical instruments and won a prestigious music competition and an opportunity to appear with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. He had perfect pitch, a photographic memory, which was his most prized possession, and became the youngest member ever of the Chicago Musicians Union. Apologies to any member of that organization who's here that I just got the name wrong. The money that he earned playing club gigs as a result would pay his living expenses when he went to college. But he wasn't just an exceptional musician, he was an exceptional student. He turned down Harvard to attend the University of Colorado on a full scholarship. When it came time to go to law school, he turned down Harvard again and a full scholarship to the University of Chicago to attend the University of Michigan Law School so he could be close to my mother. But saying he attended Michigan Law School is really an oversimplification. Somehow, he convinced the admissions office to admit him and give him a full scholarship 2 weeks before school started without ever submitting a formal application. It was at the University of Colorado that he met our mother, Brenda. He was a senior and she was a freshman. He was the president of the ZBT fraternity, handsome, smart, charismatic, and she was an innocent young beauty from Detroit that he set his sights on immediately. We always love to hear the story about how he almost destroyed his fraternity house to create the ZB Tahiti, a party of seemingly mythical proportions that featured a waterfall emanating from a third-floor window and an actual moat with live alligators. One of those alligators, dead, was later lovingly presented to my unsuspecting mother as a gift on one of their dates. My dad was a charmer. After getting married during his 3rd year of law school, our parents moved to Chicago to build their life together. But Dad was not so interested in the law. Rather than go into full-time practice, he began a series of entrepreneurial ventures that would ultimately come to include a chain of car washes, a chain of arcades, a restaurant, a newspaper vending machine, a children's museum, and an actual gold mine. Dad had such an even-keeled personality that it would have been easy not to notice that he was actually quite a risk-taker. And he pursued his dreams even when it was either inconvenient to do so or well beyond the point that many others would have given up. Many of his businesses didn't work out, but he never gave up. It ultimately proved to be his law partnership with his law school friend, Frank Pollock, that led to the creation of one of the premier real estate tax assessment firms in the city of Chicago on nothing more than a handshake agreement, because that's how he worked. He didn't need a contract because he knew he was the most honest person in the room. Together, they built a client list that included United Airlines, Walmart, and the Chicago Bears, among many others. Some of my favorite memories of Dad come from the summer I worked for him while I was in high school. I had always experienced him as a fairly self-contained, not particularly talkative, and even sometimes a little distant person. But at work, he was completely different. I'll never forget watching Frank and him shuttle back and forth between each other's offices to tell stories and tell jokes, smoke cigars. Seemed like work was the most fun place to be ever, and he made the most of it. He might not have been a big talker in the rest of his life, but he was definitely a doer, not just in business, but especially when it came to food and entertainment. No matter where we went in the country, and Dad schlepped us in the car all over the country, he would take us to the best amusement parks and always knew where to find the best ice cream, even if it meant driving 25 miles out of the way to get it. Of course, he never ordered anything other than a pineapple milkshake, but nobody's perfect, and our dad, at least in that regard, was no exception. And nobody loved food more than Dad. But he never ate more than one meal a day. Nowadays, they call that intermittent fasting. But back then, we just thought it was weird. But when he ate, he ate. As recently as yesterday, Jay related, the guy who owns Deer Frank's in Deerfield still remembers Dad. On one occasion, Hillary remembers the following interaction. Dad walked up to the counter to order, and he said, quote, "I'd like a double dog, an Italian beef, dipped, fries, a large Diet Coke, and a vanilla milkshake." And then he turned to Hillary and said, "And what would you like?" And the guy behind the counter said, "Are you joking?" No, he wasn't. That was his dinner on a regular basis. His partner Frank used to say that Dad had a singular way of choosing hot dog joints, claiming that he decided where the best hot dogs were by counting how many dead bodies were lying on the street in front. But it wasn't all about hot dogs and milkshakes. Dad also had a truly refined palate and dined at some of the finest restaurants in the world. From Hors d'Oeuvres to Osso Buco, our dad knew food. And as I said, while he was not a religious man, it would not be fair to say that he was not a man of faith. He had faith in himself and in his own abilities. He had faith in his friends, and he had faith in his family. And he was loyal to a fault. While his faith in himself may have been compromised these past few years, his faith in the people around him grew that much stronger, placing his trust in his children to preserve the estate that represented his life's work and to make even the most critical decisions about his medical care. And then there was his faith in Brenda, our mom. No matter what they went through, and in 66 plus years together, they went through plenty. His love and devotion to her never flagged, and the feeling was mutual. Somehow, whatever Dad lost in his faculties over the past few years, their relationship gained in camaraderie, rapport, love, and a shared sense of humor that I had never seen in their relationship before. In particular, I want to thank Jay, Hillary, and our cousin Mark Levine, who took on all the legal, financial, and business decisions, and especially to Hillary, who did everything in her power to make sure Dad was getting the best care, often at the expense of managing the needs of her own work and family. And with Andy being in DC and me in New York, it was truly comforting to know that Hillary and Jay were looking out for every detail of Dad's care and made every effort to include us in the decision-making process, even though they didn't have to. I love you, Dad. You are my inspiration, and you always will be.
Unbeknownst to us at the time, our father's Parkinson's disease first manifested years ago. From his 30s and into his 50s, our father ran 7 miles a day, 7 days a week. And when he ran, he looked like a wounded penguin. When I was in middle school, as my friend's mother was driving our carpool, she said, "Oh, look at that poor man on the bike path." And I said, "That's my dad." He attributed his worsening gait to bad knees, even though he wasn't in any pain. But because he avoided all doctors other than his beloved cousin Lauren, who was a pediatric orthopedic surgeon, he never got his knees checked out and instead self-medicated with baby chicken cartilage. Note that it had to be baby chickens and not mature chickens, and fresh orange juice with pulp, not from concentrate, a magic elixir that he found in some magazine. When the placebo effect from that concoction wore off and his mobility grew more impaired, he gave up running and started using the Stairmaster instead. Then, in his 60s, with his limp continuing to worsen, he switched to the elliptical and golfing with a cart. Well into his 80s, he would golf twice a weekend. My husband, Charles, and my father-in-law, Harvey, noted with affection that there appeared to be an inverse ratio between his enthusiasm for the game and his ability. About 5 years ago, when we realized that our father's razor-sharp memory was failing him, he was diagnosed with dementia. When he was first diagnosed, the neurologist noted that he also had symptoms that were consistent with Parkinson's. But it wasn't until last year that he received a definitive diagnosis. At that time, the doctor surmised that those decades of working out had largely kept the disease at bay. Perhaps not surprisingly, he could not remember that he had been diagnosed with dementia or Parkinson's, but he understood that he just wasn't as quick as he had been. One time, when I was taking him to lunch, and he lamented that he wasn't as witty as he used to be, I reflected his own brand of humor back at him and said that he'd never really been that funny to begin with. But the truth is, he was funny, often uncomfortably so. Not because his jokes were dirty or crass, but because he had an incredibly dry, biting sense of humor that was often not situationally appropriate. Like the time he joked to my husband, who was in the hospital about to go into surgery for a ruptured appendix, that the beeping machines must have meant that he was flatlining. Our father grew despondent about the mystery of what was happening to him, that, as he often put it, he couldn't put 2 and 2 together. For him, his photographic memory and his intellect were his essence. They were the key to who he was and all that he had achieved. But to those who knew and loved him, his memory was simply an intriguing aside. And as his illness progressed, the essence of who he was became crystal clear. Last December, our father fell and shattered his hip. He ended up in the hospital for several days and then spent an additional 4 weeks in rehab. Because of the dementia, he had to be oriented several times a day to where he was and why he was there. And if he moved, he was practically delirious with pain. And yet, despite his agonizing pain and confusion and the fact that he had every reason in the world to be very grumpy or worse, he was as sweet as could be. When the staff would move him, he would scream and groan, and they would mutter about how sorry they were. And despite the dementia, when it was all over, he would reassure them and say, "It's okay, I know you're just doing your job." When I would tell him I loved him, he would look at me and say, "I know you do," in such a loving way, as though he was trying to reassure me that he understood how I felt about him, and at the same time, expressing his gratitude. Unfortunately for our father, his injury accelerated his physical and mental decline. When we brought him home from rehab, he required 24-hour care, in large part because he could not remember that he'd hurt himself and couldn't stand unassisted. Flanked by his loving and devoted caregivers, especially Dave, who was with him 72 hours a week, and Ben, Clint, and John, he continued the hard work of trying to regain some semblance of mobility. Each day, they would spend the morning with him up in the gym, sitting side by side in their masks, doing bicep curls, and then practice walking. It was grueling, painful work, and the loss of his independence was maddening to him, even more so because he didn't know the cause. And yet, his sweetness persisted. He never snapped. He was never short. He never pitied himself. He would say please and thank you, always, no matter how crummy he felt. And he would banter for hours a day with our mother, Dave, and a steady stream of visitors. As he lost more words and became more fatigued, he said less and listened more, but always with a smile and always eager to add a quip if he could get his timing right. Despite his increasingly profound deficits, he was still Byron. Although my mom, brothers, and I all knew that Dad never raised his voice, never swore, never lost his cool, I think at some level we just thought he exercised tremendous restraint and self-control, and that perhaps that was his essence. In the end, though, to us at least, his essence was not his discipline and not his intellect, though those were both impressive, to be sure. Instead, it was his sweetness. He was sweet to the core until his very last breath. Love you, Dad.
Hi, I'm Rich. I'm Byron's first and oldest grandchild, speaking on behalf of the grandchildren here. We haven't been around long enough to know Byron like many people here have. The stories you've mostly heard, the ones that are famous. That said, though, I was there on the day Byron became grandpa. That's something that very few people can claim but me. It was over 34 years ago at this point. And since then, multiple handfuls of additional people, we lose count sometimes, have come to call him Grandpa or Papa. And as has been mentioned earlier this year, one started calling him Great-Grandpa. Or, I mean, she doesn't talk yet, but I imagine that's probably what she'd call him. Like everyone else in our family, my grandpa was very excited to hear about the next generation of Weises. Unlike everyone else in my family, though, he was able to convey his excitement in a single word, which I believe was merely fantastic. Okay. While everyone here knew Byron in their own unique way, being his grandchildren allowed us to interact with him in a special way that you don't interact with other people or even your own children. I was told of one time when I was a baby where my grandparents came to visit me. He held me in his arms, and I started crying. I mean, what baby wouldn't if he was holding them? As he was handing me back to my parents, I've been told that a smile crept onto his face and said, "We gotta go." So, all the benefits of being able to have fun with a child and none of the responsibilities. It's great for him. Not to say he wasn't responsible with us. On one of his many ice cream outings with my sister, Robin, she spilled chocolate ice cream on herself. It actually happened pretty often. My grandfather got a little concerned. He told Robin, "Your mom's gonna kill me. Your shirt's dirty." And she reassured him, "Grandpa, no, it's okay. My mom always has me wear this shirt when I get ice cream with you." She had a specific ice cream shirt with Grandpa. That was far from the only thing he would do with us, though it was definitely one of the bigger ones, and one of the few that required its own change of clothing. It's difficult to summarize our relationship with our grandfather, especially because I'm speaking for half of the front row at the moment. The constant between us all is that my grandfather was constantly involved with us and always present in our lives. For those of us lucky to live nearby, we were, of course, able to see him more often, whether we were just there to have lunch with him, go on a walk, see a movie. Sometimes we'd do something special. He took the train a lot. We'd take the train downtown, see his office, maybe go to a museum. Occasionally, we'd share in his interest in golfing, go to the golf course or the driving range. That was always fun. I think Rob especially golfed with him later on. He would often come to see us at our concerts, our races, sports events, anything else we did, really. He was always there. We always had dinner pretty much every single week, Sundays and more recently Tuesdays. For the grandchildren who are farther away, it's obviously a little harder to see them, but probably doesn't come as much of a surprise that my grandfather was an avid traveler and he made sure to be there for major life events. He also really enjoyed our Zoom meetings and birthdays and celebrations, as we did during the worst of the COVID pandemic. He once remarked that he was amazed. As a child, he never, ever would have imagined that such a technology existed. And he was truly grateful that we were all able to come together, even though we were so far apart. Which is really nice that he was grateful. I think that might have been why he put up with being the main character in most of our Jib Jab videos. If you're not familiar with Jib Jab, it's you can take a picture of someone and you upload it to this site, and it superimposes their image on a silly picture that will dance around to music, basically making our own custom music video of Grandpa dancing around with I forget, the word doesn't come to me, but many different things, honestly. He never seemed to mind. Maybe he even enjoyed it. I don't know. For better or for worse, we learned a lot from my grandfather. It always astounded me how many unique experiences he had, all the jobs he'd done, things he tried to do, the skills he had, how remarkable his life was. He taught us patience, particularly when my brother Rob wanted to cut his grass, and my grandfather gave him a pair of scissors. I'm not sure how long that went on for. He taught us his unique brand of humor, particularly how to roast our grandmother. He taught us that one can, in fact, opt out of small talk. We remember seeing my grandfather sitting alone in a corner at my grandmother's 75th birthday party. We asked him why he wasn't mingling with people, and he responded, "I've already talked to everyone. Nothing left to say." Fortunately, we all knew Grandpa had a kind heart, which helped to interpret his sometimes laconic and direct speech. He didn't sugarcoat things either. After the Kustons hosted one Passover, Eli once sent out a satisfaction survey, which Byron, being the dutiful grandfather he was, responded. He rated the food an 8 out of 10 and suggested more wine for the guests. And Grandpa did know a thing or two about fine dining. He introduced us to such delicacies as Cookers, Dear Franks, Culver's, Tony's Subs, Homer's, and even Kopp's, all the way up in Wisconsin. If you're not familiar with those, most of them are hot dog or ice cream places. There was often ice cream or custard involved whenever Grandpa was. Again, my sister Robin even had an ice cream with Grandpa shirt. As my Uncle Mike mentioned, my grandfather had some interesting eating habits, which probably looked weird to everyone else. I may have gotten that from him, so it's always looked normal to me. Though there are a couple things that even to me was weird, which anyone who knows my eating habits, that's saying a lot. Particularly how he went 3 decades without drinking water. His drink of choice was Coke Zero with lime. And he always made sure to ask at restaurants that they take his water glass away, because he didn't need it. Even for me, that's a bit much. He was a very unique and remarkable man. He played an important role in all of our lives and in our development. I once asked him what I thought was a silly and mundane question, the answer to which ended up being a very important catalyst in my life that I feel like really led me to fully understand adulthood. I asked him a simple question: "Grandpa, when did you start thinking you were old?" "Old?" he chuckled. "I never started thinking I was old." I came to realize there's no point where I'd gain magic knowledge to become like my dad or my grandfather. That my grandfather was just 53 years older than me and had a head start. We were the same in many ways. The age difference was the biggest difference, and that and the button-down shirts. While we both wore button-down shirts, his were monogrammed and oftentimes bright and colorful enough to warn away predators. I'm glad that my grandfather lived to see most of his grandchildren get out of childhood at least and become their own people. I'm particularly glad that my siblings and I grew into adults and were here in the area to spend time with him as adults. He lived a long, full, and happy life. He was a wonderful, kind, caring, genuine, and selfless man. The knowledge, experience, skill, and kindness he brought to everyone he interacted with was incalculable. It's amazing to think that in 2 literal ways, we are all here because of him, and I exist because of him. And it is amazing to see the positive effect he has had on this world. We're extremely grateful to have had long, close, and loving relationships with my grandfather, Byron. We will miss him dearly. We love you very much, Grandpa.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Levine, and I am Byron's cousin. Hillary mentioned that to her, the essence of Byron was sweetness. And I think that's right, but I wanted to talk about three other words that came to mind when I thought about Byron. Because the essence of Byron is his character, but it's more than just sweetness, although that's certainly part of it. And the three words that I came up with were selfless, patient, and humble. And I'm just going to take a couple minutes, and some of this is, I knew Byron in a little bit different way than his kids and grandkids did, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I knew Byron for almost, as of tomorrow, 58 years. In other words, all of my life. When I was young, I remember the fun sitting in the back, not the back seat, but the back of Byron's Corvette. And I say back because there was no back seat. So you kind of scrunch in the back, and then he drove us around the neighborhood a little bit. And it was a fun car to say, I rode in a Corvette. And I heard about the car washes. I remember my parents dropping me off at Byron and Brenda's and going out to dinner with Byron and Brenda, and then leaving me with Michael and Jay and Andrew. Now, Hillary, you weren't around then, or at least weren't eating pizza, but I learned really quickly that you had to have pizza. If once the pizza was out, you had to grab your slices right away, because otherwise it would all be gone. I had one slice. I was hungry. But when I was older and an adult, I got to see a different side of Byron, and I got to see his true character and what made him special to me. I was 24 years old, my parents both died. I'm an only child. Byron took me in. Byron was there for me. He acted as my advisor, my friend, and as a second parent. He answered my calls every day when I needed someone to talk to. He helped me get through the hardest time in my life, and he never asked for a single thing from me. Selfless. The entire time I knew Byron, he was always calm. He was like a rock. People said he didn't talk much, but he did talk, and when he talked, it was usually something important that he said. But no matter what happened, I never saw him, not once, lose his temper or get overly excited. Patient. But that's not all. About 2 or 3 years ago, when Byron still had all his faculties with him, I talked to him, and I had a family of my own at that point, had 3 of my own kids, and I was an adult, and I said to Byron when I saw him, I said, I want to thank you for everything you did for me, because you really went above and beyond. And you know what he said? I basically was thanking him for being selfless and patient, the way that I just described. But the answer that he gave tells you so much about Byron. The answer he gave was, what else was I going to do? Like, what he did was, you were a kid, I was your family. Well, that's the kind of person Byron was, acting to help someone else without a second thought. And then thinking that what he did wasn't out of the ordinary, that it was just a normal thing that anyone would do, like another day at the office. Well, it wasn't just a normal thing. What he did was special. That's humble. Byron, I'm going to miss you, and may your memory be a blessing. Thank you.
I'm Hank Stein. I want to offer my sincere condolence to Brenda, to Byron's family, who we loved so very much, And to all here today, I offer my condolence. When I look back at my life, I realized that Byron was always there. He was my oldest and dearest friend. From kindergarten at Washington Boulevard Temple, where we first met, and Charlotte was there too, we formed an everlasting bond. To grade school, where Byron and I each played in the school's bands, where Byron and I were in high school, we would meet at games. My high school and his high school were in the same conference, and we would see each other at each games. Wherever we got together, it seemed he was always there for me. When I talked to Byron just before I was leaving for college at the University of Colorado, we discovered that he was going there also, and that we both ended up as ZBTs, and we roomed together. We were social chairmen together, and we planned the parties. And on one party, Byron mixed the punch a little too strong, I think. And within 15 minutes, everyone was throwing up. When Charlotte and I were married, Byron was the first we asked to be in our wedding party. Byron spent a lot of time at our apartment in Boulder, Colorado. He was our first dinner guest and suffered through many terrible dinners as Charlotte was learning to cook. Of course, Charlotte got better, and he had those dinners also. When we met Brenda, we doubled on many early dates. We loved her right away. Whenever there was a problem or a sickness, Byron would call, he would visit, or help in some way. Byron was always there. When Charlotte and I sold our family business of 60 years, we were so sad when we locked the door for the very last time. And we looked up, and there was Byron and Brenda, dear, dear friends. It's been a blessing to have Byron for a friend. He has enriched the life of each and every one of us. Yes, Byron was always there. How do I replace him now that he is no longer there? I can't, but I have all those wonderful, wonderful memories. He was strong, he was kind, he was good, and most important to me, he was my dear, dear friend. I pray that God will bless him and grant him peace now and forevermore.
I'm still stuck on the alligators. And I believe that maybe Byron considered the alligator his spirit animal. Allow me. Alligators, as noted, have been around forever, and as you heard by Mr. Stein's comments, he was omnipresent in friends' lives, always loyal to a fault, sometimes his children added. His children made comment after comment about their father being by their side in their lives. His son offered one memory of when his dad was there to take him to the airport on his way to college, gently reassuring him and reminding him before he exited the car, "Son, just be sure not to F it up." Alligators also are clever, also always taking advantage of opportunities of their habitat. Well, Byron was alert to this. When he was young, though a gifted musician, he took every chance to play sports and excel in them, specifically basketball. At Colorado, he found the student symphony a little too basic, so he tried, and he was accepted upon the freshman basketball team. Like the nature of an alligator who represents power and becomes master of its domain, Byron went onto the court with great confidence. Well, I guess every alligator has its bad days and its nemesis, because Byron went up against another freshman that year playing for Kansas, and he was overpowered. It's nothing to be ashamed about when you hear that it was Wilt Chamberlain. But the alligator isn't born with innate power. In fact, when they're young, they're quite vulnerable. Thus, the alligator exemplifies a power gained through life's experience. Byron's upbringing was not one of the silver spoon. His father offered them a good life, but he needed to work 3 jobs, and the family lived in a modest home above one of the shops on the street. He absorbed the lessons of his father's experiences, and thus he matured into a hardworking man himself. Alligators also have eyes. He was like, how much does he know about alligators? Alligators have eyes on top of their heads, and thus they can see easily what's happening ahead of them. Byron had great vision, great foresight, and may I say, he did so and used it hunting down his prey, Brenda, when she was but a freshman, as you heard, at school. But this prey was not an easy catch, and she broke away at one point. But with the encouragement of her father, Byron held on tight, and obviously, things worked out. Brenda, you noted how blessed you two were to be able to travel so extensively to places like India and China and Hong Kong and Australia and throughout Europe. At base, so sweetly you said, my husband was a decent, honest, and sweet man. Alligators' prehistoric brains have changed very little in the tens of millions of years, so they simply rely on instinct and innate strengths. You heard of one. Byron's possessed an innate gift, such as the God-given photographic memory, which allowed him to champion over several hurdles throughout his lifetime. Alligators, you'd be shocked to know, are able to regenerate limbs or their tail if it falls off. The secret to that is cartilage, maybe baby chicken cartilage. I don't know, but that's what it says. Alligators are known to be far less aggressive than a crocodile, only attacking if they're hungry or provoked by an outside threat. And in these ways, I think Byron channeled that spirit animal. When hungry, as you heard, Byron was known to have quite the appetite. He enjoyed some sweets, his milkshakes and ice creams and Friday donuts at the office, but he only ate, as I think Michael said, only one meal a day, dinner, and that often came after one of his afternoon runs. And at that point, he was ravenous, with an appetite worthy of the Nathan's hot dog challenge. And like the gator, he gnawed on every bit of his meal, sucking the marrow right out of the bones. The outside threat was Parkinson's, dementia, and he battled that as would a gator with all of his might. Notwithstanding his fulfillment in life, Byron did not go gently into that good night as time was expiring. How he despised losing some of his memory, his athletic coordination, and his ability to drive his car. And he knew with that great eyesight, lurking in the horizon, there lay the predator, inching its way closer. Byron had no tolerance for the grim reaper. In fact, you said he feared it. Yes, he admitted to his family that he had a great life and did what he wanted to do, and all in all, his life was well lived. But nonetheless, he kept striving to gnaw the marrow. You, his family, gave him every chance and every ounce of your hearts in making sure he was never alone. He was able to pass with dignity in his own home and not experience what at times, as you put it, Brenda, he didn't have to face the torture of the damned, as you said, hooked up to machines and being alone in a lone hospital room. You surrounded him and then you shepherded him into his next world with love, whether you were there physically or spiritually by his side. And though you could not help him escape his mortality, you blessed him with peace of mind and promise of this family's evolution, which would reflect and celebrate his impact during his years. Baruch, Baruch, Baruch. Byron was a blessed man and a blessing of a man to many. His whimsical touches of humor in your lives, such as his wedding toasts, will bring smiles, maybe grimaces. His honesty will be honored. His intellect will leave you baffled, such as when he was in the Air National Guard and couldn't study for the bar exam, but he passed it anyhow. His industriousness, such as his working during law school as an orderly at the hospital and as a driver's education teacher, but to name a few other side jobs while he was in school. That will inspire you to make the most of every day of your life. His sensibilities, such as not to follow Wilt into the NBA, will offer you perspective. His pride in family will keep you all entwined as one as you work to navigate life without your North Star. She'asa nisim lavotenu bayamim hahem bazman hazeh. We marvel at the mysteries of history, the miracles of our lifetimes, and the miracle of every day. Having walked this earth at the same time in history as Byron Weis, for you is a miracle and a blessing and a pleasure and an honor. To you, his children, his grandchildren, and Perry too, you shall be the miracles of your family's generation. And it is through you that the generations of your family will come to know Byron Weis. And that shall be their blessing. If you'll stand, we'll come to the close of our service with a memorial prayer. Slicho, Hanun v'rachu merach ha'apayim v'rav chesed, ha'mesech ha'bara presha, v'akravat yesha, u'mnucha nichona tacha kanfei hashchina, b'malot kedoshim u'tehorim, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת ברוך בן סידני ולין שלח לעולמו מענה בעל רחמים זכרה לו לטובה כל זכויותיו וצדקותיו בארצות החיים. ובטח לו שערי צדק ויורה, שערי חמלה וחנינה, בסתר כנפיך אסתירהו לעולמים. וצרור בצרחיים, בצרחיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו. ונאמר Amen. Compassionate God, grant an infinite rest to your beloved child, Byron H. Weis, who has now come back home to his eternal home. We pray that you remember the worthy and righteous deeds that he performed amongst us in the land of the living. May this loved individual find perfect peace in your embrace. May the next time this family have reason to come together only be a moment of celebration in their lives. Amen.
Amen.
Everybody be seated for a moment. This concludes our service here in the chapel. Interment will take place immediately at the family plot at Memorial Park just down the road here in Skokie. Family will be sitting Shiva later this afternoon from 3 to 5, as well as from 6 to 8 p.m., as well on Tuesday from 12 to 5 and from 6 to 8 at the Cooston Residence, 2128 Pioneer Road in Evanston. Memorial contributions in Byron's memory can be made to the Jewish Council for Youth Services or to the Pacific Udall Center for Parkinson's Disease Research. That information, as well as the Shiva hours, are available on the service folder that you received on the way in. If you did not receive them on the way in, we have updated ones. Just to one point of correction, the Hebrew date of death is actually, let's say Shabbat, Erev Chanukah, the 24th of Kislev, not the 23rd. A few moments of procession to the cemetery will be forming in our parking lot. If you plan on joining the family in procession, please make sure you obtain an orange funeral safety sticker to place on the inside portion of your windshield, as well as a magnetic flag to place on the rooftop portion of your vehicle. While in procession, please make sure that your high beam lights, your hazard lights are on at all times. Please stay as closely as safety permits to the car in front of you, especially while going through intersection. Please use your horn liberally while in procession, as we don't want any cars to cut in our procession. Please do not talk on your cellular device while in procession. This time, I'm going to ask all the grandchildren to please rise and help serve as pallbearers. If you could stand next to your grandfather's casket. I'm going to ask everybody else to please rise as we escort the family, all the clergy, the grandchildren, and the casket from the chapel. Thank you so much.